Om Tadviddi Pranipatena Pariprasnena Sevaya Upadekshanti Te Jnana Jnaninas Tattvadarshinaha Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. Aspiring students approach the illumined soul via prostration, humility, and selfless service. Then those great souls initiate them in to the Enlightenment science, the highest wisdom of Brahman. Om nahi ginena sadrisham pavitram miha vidyate tat svayam yoga samsiddha kalenatmani vindate. Om shantihi shantihi shantihi. For all aspirants after freedom and truth should know that Jnanam, the highest wisdom, is the best purifier in all the worlds and the best destroyer of ignorance. All souls realize this in due time. Om peace, peace, peace. For there shines Brahman. May that Brahman protect us. May that Brahman sustain us, and may that Brahman illumine our thinking process. May we not find fault with each other, with the world, or with the teachings, and may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, and may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat. So great boon and blessing to be here on Sunday at our usual time to pick up on last week's class, which is a new series we're looking at called the Jnana Bhumikas, or Jnana Bhumikas. Sapta means seven. So we're really talking about upper stages of awareness that some of us who have been pursuing the fruits of spiritual life for some months or some years, maybe longer, even decades, are already coursing through these upper tiers. We want to make sure that when we hear about such levels of consciousness, when we hear about the seven chakras, when we hear about the eight limbs of yoga, we hear about the Ashtanga Marga, the Eightfold Path, all these systems that are put forth as teachers. Well, people tend to sit there and think, I wish I had those, or I wish I knew those, or I wish I could attain to those. But I'd say that once you've heard them, you've already come to be aware of them, then they're already burgeoning inside of you. Because they, after all, exist inside of you first and foremost anyway. And now you're just in a position where taking on a body-mind mechanism, you're seeing them from the outside, like on our nice teaching charts here, of which I think I produced number 403 yesterday about Gaudapada for the May retreat. So it's that objectivity, subjectivity thing, is that objectivity is a good thing, but we want to make sure that we attain to a witness consciousness of these things rather than a state of I don't know-ism, like, oh, he's teaching me, I have to learn this. In Advaita Vedanta and Vedanta overall, with Swami Vivekananda at its head in this particular day and time, we look at it in a different way, as if these things are already within us. They're like stairways that many of us go up and down every day, but maybe some of us stumble to lower steps, and maybe others don't even know the staircase is there. And they have to kind of rediscover it. And awakening to spirituality or rediscovering. I was talking to one student yesterday in a very nice series of exchanges we had on the email about desires and karmas and so forth, but also this idea of all knowledge lying within you, that you approach it in that way. when you get the upper hand by having a great path like Vedanta, coming to hear of great souls like Sri Ramakrishna and Sri Sharda Devi and Swami Vivekananda, and you already can begin to assume that you're their children. And so you have a great father, a great mother, and an older brother, and they're already yours. That's already a given fact. And it would be then the same just to follow through with this Jnana wisdom, which I just chanted twice from the Bhagavad Gita about. I find it very beautiful that Sri Krishna, who's always thought about in terms of love and devotion, is teaching wisdom and saying how it's the most important thing for the aspiring soul. So it would be very good if we could have that non-dual perspective when we hear something that sounds familiar to us, and rather than saying, oh, I don't know that, I wish I knew it. I wish I knew what my teacher knew. I wish I knew what the seers knew, and so forth. But they're kind of coming at it from the standpoint of, you already know this, let's just take it up and brush it off and show you it. Same with your soul, your Atman, your soul with a capital S, not the transmigrating soul. We'll look at that today in these lower states, because most people don't know about rebirth. Then they begin to intuit that maybe that's happening to them, but they don't take teachings on rebirth, like is given in Tibetan Buddhism over the last number of decades, even here in the West. So my point here, I guess, to start out this second class on the 7 upper stages of knowledge is to say I'm very familiar with those. I probably operate at them already. Like if I pick up a book and I understand what I'm reading, like a Gita, any Gita, Bhagavad Gita, Ashtavakra, Samhita Gita, Avadhuta Gita, Shiva Gita, Devi Gita, any Gita I pick up and I feel at one with that, and I'm actually using my prana and my energy to extend my hands to pick up this book and bring it to my eyes and read the wisdom or hear it from the lips of an illumined preceptor, as the Upanishad says, well, that's a sign of already advanced level of Jnana Bhumikas. So then why are we spending so much time on the Ajnana Bhumikas? Because we spent a whole class last time, and we'll probably spend most of this class hoisting us up to this level of the 7 Jnana Bhumikas. Because as my teacher said, in Vedanta, we go hand in hand toward the truth. We don't necessarily go solo. We see great souls like Swami Vivekananda, definitely a solo kind of being, but came back to help us, came to our country, took all the pains to try and talk us out of holding on to the idea that we have karmas that are insurmountable, or it's going to take a long time to get through them. Just blast your karmas. Raise your consciousness to these higher states of awareness. Operate there for a while, and then where will your karmas be? Where will your fear of death be? Where will your attachment to objects be? Where will your brooding on the future and the past be when you just train the mind to live at a higher level of consciousness? So that's what, when I was in my 20s, our founder, Lex Hickson, SRV Associations, had shared with me. He said, basically, we're just going to keep company with these holy beings for as long as we need to. And maybe eternally too, once we realize who they are. And in that way, then we'll be able to get the transmission that I just talked about. And the sincere seeker approaches the illumined souls, prostrate, humility, do selfless service, and then ask those questions that come from the space of atmic inquiry, atma vichara. When everything has been settled, the atmosphere has been set, and then it's the time to ask those questions that are deepest in your mind and dearest to your heart. And then you'll get those specific answers that will, that if you have any lingering bits of your consciousness, any fragments of your consciousness still associated with these lower levels, they'll swiftly be destroyed. and karmas along with it. So karmas cling to these lower states, you see. It's like putting a match to a ball of cotton. Oof, it's gone in an instant. There's just a little bit of ashes left over. Rather than saying, oh, where's the match? Too much trouble to strike it. Does cotton burn? I mean, you can go on forever asking questions about the nature of non-reality, but you have to really find the inquiry into the nature of reality and have your faith in it and ensconce yourself in it. I am that. I mean, basically, Tatvamasi is a very high statement, a Mahavakya and so forth, but it's also very applicable to a person who's extracting themselves out of these lower ways of thinking. And last satsang Saturday, people were speaking up and saying, I still have those. I mean, people had been on the path for, I know, 20 or 30 years. And so I still have those tendencies in my mind. I still think about them and they still haunt me on certain days. And so they must have this image in their mind that there are some beings who just are done with that completely. And that's a very inspiring thought. So that's why we're hoisting ourselves and everyone else with us up through the Ajnana Bhumikas. We need to know the unreal as well as know the real. In Sri Ramakrishna's way of saying, don't study Maya up close, get distance from it, and then study it if you must. So that's how we're going to look at ignorance, which is unreal, karma, which is unreal, suffering, which is unreal, lack of enlightenment, which is unreal, brooding, which is unreal, lust, anger, greed, envy, jealousy, pride, shame, pride of caste, pride of lineage, these 6 passions and the 8 fetters, all of them unreal. It's like you put them in one basket, you put it aside and say, there's the reality finally, because I don't have so much of my attention placed on things that have no substance. I'm putting my attention on that one thing that is substance, that is essence, that is the swarupa. It's the subtlemost of the subtle. Anaranian, it's called in Sanskrit. So that's how I'm starting off this second class in order to give us all this right perspective. One of the Eightfold Path of Lord Buddha, which I just mentioned, and I do have that chart with me to show either today or next Sunday, is having that right perspective before you start to practice. And it was also Sri Ramakrishna's, one of his favorite teachings. He said, it'd be very good if all of you just, renounced some things and then spent time meditating on God and then went to your jobs and then raised your families and so forth. It might sound kind of impractical in this day and age to do that. And in the Western country, it definitely is not that possible because we haven't been started out with the Dharma. The problem in India and further Far East is that they have been given that for centuries, but it's become old and worn out and outdated. They don't believe it anymore in the face of Western materialism that's coming on fast and has come on fast worldwide. So that's the 2 different perspectives, generally speaking, of West and East right now, is that the West, we just don't have any place to start from because we were never given the Dharma. In the East, they've been had it so long and have produced so many hundreds and thousands of Jesuses and so forth, so many illumined souls, that now it's become the carpet's become sort of threadbare, as Vivekananda said. And you have to waken it up anew. It has to start out fresh. And it's very ironic, but very true that you can look at something ancient and bring it back and it will be new in this day and time. So going on a little bit too longer as the necessary, probably about the fact that we go hand in hand to Brahman. If one of us gets a ray of light, we must turn and share it in Vedanta with the others right away before it gets covered over by the world bewitching Maya or by the ignorance of the mind, the non-ignorance of self-realization. See, basically, I'm striving so hard for my own enlightenment that I forget that others are along with me, who are my companions. So Vivekananda said we can have a collective awakening together. If some of us can't get full awakening in this lifetime, and it's probably true in this day and age, the circumstances, and we can try for a collective awakening together. So that's very universal, wide-minded thinking on the part of a great soul. And so to jump to the chase then, or to the climb, as we're climbing up a ladder, we're climbing up an 8-limb tree, we're extracting ourselves up and out of the bedrock and mud and dirt of Maya in the lower realms. And last week we looked at least 3 of those levels of Ajnana Bhumika. And we had those charts, you remember, that had to do with desire, karma, and samskaras, how if you look at a teaching like this and you're a newbie, you haven't awakened yet to the fact that these are eternal teachings and accepted as true by the seers, then you're probably going to look at that and say, well, where's my first lifetime? So we dealt with that last weekend. There's, you might say, a first lifetime in every cycle, but the cycles are infinite. So you're always having a kind of first lifetime if you're taking embodiment. So in that way, you can kind of give up the question as being a little bit impractical, and just say that there's no many beginning, middle, and ends to anything, according to the great souls. So I must answer the question as best I can. So last time we saw how souls have, through many lifetimes of desire-based action, have formed mental impressions that bring the soul back into conditions, and they can't remember what went before. They don't know what's coming up, past, present, and future, 3 phases of time. So then that's going to be something they have to deal with, and it's called spiritual awakening. Now, somebody more astute could look at that same problem, and I've had this happen to me before, and say, well, you're talking about rebirth and transmigration and all that, but what is it that transmigrates? And they think that that statement is a final answer to the question. It's like they think they're so pompous, so arrogant as to think that if they just say something like that they've heard from some great teacher, that that's going to be an answer to everything. Well, there's nothing that transmigrates. Well, we can tell you what transmigrates. There's actually 3 bodies you have, and the karma is collecting inside of them. And so it's a transmigrating soul, is what India calls it. And so it's a complex of samskaras, karmas, and desire-based thinking. That's there even in Buddha. If you look Buddhism, if you look at the 12 nidanas or links, so you can't ask a question like that, feigning non-dual understanding, but not understanding that. To say that there is no transmigrating complex, is just kind of a statement of your own ignorance. So this is why great souls like Lord Vasishtha have given us systems like this, so they can show us how we got into the predicament of darkness. At the same time, they're saying it's like darkness in a cave, and if you bring in a torch, it's gone immediately. So that's why I started out this class saying what I did, is that you can bring your mind to a higher state of vibration by studying teachings that vibrate higher than secular teachings. And at that point, then all of a sudden, you're becoming aware of yourself. And if you become aware of yourself, you're becoming aware of the self. You're becoming aware of a self that is becoming aware that it had previous lifetimes. And that's where we left off. So in the standpoint of the transmigrating soul that's having many lifetimes, it remembers them back in its body-mind mechanism complex. We're speaking at that level. And it's all of a sudden, at first, it's completely unaware of what it is, who it is, where it's going, where it came from. But that's all of those questions have to get answered by degrees. So that's why we were talking about, and what we were talking about in the first 3 Jnana Bhumikas, if you remember, the first 3 of the 7 stages of knowledge. So let's continue on in that climb. And I'll call up my copy here. as I said, we looked already at the whole chart on desires and samskaras. And as a quick review, that seventh and lowest state of ajnana or ignorance, we saw that it had to do with, if you'll follow along, it was called bindu jagrat. So that's a very minuscule state of waking. And in other words, a bindu can be a very powerful thing. It's a concentrated, like the third eye bindu. But down here in the lower levels of consciousness, you're talking about a consciousness, a body, mind, ego mechanism that's very limited and very dense. It doesn't have any wider view. Like just being born in the womb on earth and not knowing all your life that there's anything higher than physical matter. So that's a very dwarfed view of reality. And then other souls are born and they're immediately asking questions about the limitations of the mind and ego and intellect. And they're beginning to expand their wisdom and their knowledge base. They're beginning to do austerities that purify the senses and that they're beginning to outgrow their attachment for objects. Right away, you see people turning up their nose at the things that most of the world is coveting. Most of the rest of the percentage of humanity is covering. Myself and some people I can think of included in our young lives. We came very young to the fact that what society was giving us was not very desirable and not very high. And so you have to imagine that state of bindu jagrat, very, very tiny, egotistic kind of life. Now, one question that came in last week after the first class of this series was waking, dreaming, and deep sleep is appearing in most of these levels. And so my answer to that was that basically waking, dreaming, and deep sleep here is appearing with very little light, and waking, dreaming, and deep sleep goes on here with greater light. That's a simple answer that we came to. So basically, you can have subhecha and upwards. We'll see what that's like over the coming weeks, what kind of knowledge and awareness the soul possesses at those levels. And just walking around like Swami Vivekananda, naturally in possession of this jnana wisdom, is just the most natural thing in the world. The nectar of naturalness, they call that in India. But you'll see that there are beings that who have these are still going to sleep, dreaming, and waking up. So in the cases of ascending levels of Jnana Bhumikas, their waking, dreaming, and deep sleep is attended by more and more light. Some of the light, as we'll see today, has begun to shine upon this benighted soul who's still pulling itself up and out of darkness. And we'll see that what that darkness consists of. Sometimes in Vedanta, we've talked about it as a curtain of nescience, just this cloud of unknowing, where the brain mind cannot see through. And so it's a kind of living in a fog all its life, like living at the top of the mountain, a cloudy place where the sun never shines. So that's life inside the lower levels of the Sushumna. But the Sushumna arises in 7 higher and higher levels, or lotuses they're called. And life there at the deep level of the Sushumna, at the higher reaches of the Sushumna, is accompanied by much more light. And so the act of waking, dreaming, and deep sleep become conscious acts. And you say, oh, my body has to rest. I'll sleep. But Brahman never sleeps. My mind will stay awake and it will watch my dreams. So usually dreams are something very cloudy and murky, and people can't even remember them. When they do remember them, they don't know what they mean. So when they do remember them, they want to know what they mean. They go to some teacher, some guru, or some Sufi sheikh to get their dreams interpreted. But beyond that, there are people who just take waking, dreaming, and deep sleep as happening only on the level of prakriti, of nature. And higher consciousness has begun to suggest itself so intensely and so deeply upon them that they feel like they're in an ever awake state. We talked about that last week. Yogic insomnia, I called it sort of humorously, you see. So we talked about these lower states. We went through it. You can see it there. Um, these little teaching points. It's a root state of ignorance. It's it's where the jiva is in an incipient manifestation of itself. So it's having its first view of what it's like to be embodied. It can't remember ever being in a body again. It can look around the world and see animals and plants and insects and other beings, but it knows itself to be a body. So this is what the jiva first thinks, I'm a body. And it's not even what just your upbringing, what adharmic parents or people who are ignorant would teach you, but it's actually part of the whole process of embodiment is that, oh, I'm in a body now. I have to get used to this. I'm a baby. I have to grow. I have to gain facility of my eyes, ears, hands. I have to learn how to walk. This is what they mean by the jiva coming out at the bindu jagrat level of ignorance, basically, or lower knowledge, if you want to call it that. It's almost not a cause for blame. You can't look at the baby and say, what are you doing in that condition? See it cast aspersions upon it. You just want to help it grow. And hopefully it has in its mind, rather than in its body only, these higher memories. And we'll see how that happens, awakening at higher levels of the soul. So a quick review of the first one. The second one's Jagrat. So now we said it's not Bindu Jagrat, so it must be a wider level of waking state. And it says there, awareness of individuation. So we see that in children growing up. They begin to find out who they are. Or, of course, we would say in spiritual life, who they think they are. Who do you think you are is actually a kind of expression when somebody gets too arrogant and they become too self-centered. So it's actually a very spiritual question, who do you think you are? But you won't really find a great teacher who can explain who you really are and what you're not until much later in the game. So that's happening to these people at this Jagrat level. And this is a waking state that's very devoid of any kind of light of higher understanding. Let's just put it that way. Try and think of yourself when you were young, before you came to the Dharma. It's easy to do in the West, maybe not so easy to do in the East. But in the West, it's pretty easy to do. I really didn't know anything back then compared to what I know now. And then you say, oh, I'm so grateful that I came upon a teacher who could teach me the Dharma, because that expanded my horizons abundantly. And now I'm thinking at much higher levels of things. You see, this is where what I was saying earlier is basically don't take away the foundation upon which you understand things. You should be celebrating this at the same time you're trying to divest yourself of these. Any shreds of that are hanging on to you, like brooding about objects, or attachment to one of the senses, not even all five. You see, because down here, it's pretty much individuation means I'm a body with five senses that likes objects and hates other things. So you have your attachments and your aversions going on in a big way at that level of ignorance. So you might say embodiment on earth and the Burya Loka is common for everyone to be in ignorance. The whole thing is, will they awaken and how quickly will they awaken? That's what the seers are thinking. Those souls who want to stop and help you to where they've arrived, help you to awaken at that level, that's what they're thinking. Inception of differentiation. You might as well say inception of violence, because they start to become individuals and they begin battling and competing with each other. That's also the nature of this world. So you see that that's where wars are born, and these lower levels of ajnanam, and between countries and races, even amongst religions, like even amongst the same religion, like the Catholics and the Protestants going to war, for decades. That's Christianity, isn't it? But how about Europe? All the different countries warring against each other, even before Hitler came along. So people were trying to do what Hitler was doing, bring all the countries together under their country, under their banner. So it's a kind of domination that was going on there that was just deep there in the soul. So you can explain a lot by by looking at the seer's view of what ignorance is. You might call these seven. Oh, you want to know what the seer thinks of when he thinks of the word avidya? Well, here it is described nicely to you in stages yet. Let's go on. Maha Jagrat is like the great waking state now. It's like almost a great awakening state, but that's still yet to come because you have to pass through a few things. And this is where last week we looked at some of those charts. There's a progression of repeated rebirths. Do you remember that chart where I took all 7 mentions by Sri Krishna out of the Gita of how a soul is born to good parents, then finally to dharmic parents, then trying to be born in the family of yogis, finally being born in a family where it could follow the thread of its yoga and actually get free, and then be born in yoga itself, be in a state of yoga. So by that time, all of these stages have been coursed through, and so much of spirituality has been attained by those souls. So that's a beautiful way of studying rebirth. So that's what was happening here and where we left off last week. Progression of repeated rebirths. It becomes aware at some level that it's lived before or that it's an eternal soul. And of course, that's going to be expanded. That realization and that insight is going to be expanded to a reality pretty soon because it'll come to a place where it can actually see its past rebirths. I was thinking the other day about certain things and dreams I've had over the last 30, 40 years. There are some eternal things in my dreams, and they tend to forget them. One of them is the ashram of my teacher where I'm with him. But other ones, less spiritual, it's like there's this house in my dream that I go to and a room that I'm in that's very familiar all the time. And things are going on in that room that were specific to my life through the decades. And so I forget that room quite a bit. But then all of a sudden, I'll be waking up or falling asleep. And all of a sudden, I had that dream again about that room, that house that I go to all the time. And sometimes I have a dream about my father, who's with me, talking, living. And my thought in my dream is that he's passed already. So, I'm meeting with him, his soul. So I know that he's already dead, as it were, died many, many decades ago when I was in my 20s. So now all of a sudden I'm meeting with him again and we're communicating right there in the dream. And it seems so real that the idea of death becomes something that's unacceptable to me in my dream because there he is in his subtle body communicating with me. And so that feels very good. I have a dream about him maybe once a year or something. So those are these kind of eternal dreams that you have that keep coming back to you. And it's one way of explaining this awakening that's happening at the 3rd and 4th level of the Ajnana Bhumikas. We looked at it with Krishna's teachings last time. And let's take a quick look at the answer to that question of a person who thinks they know so much when they say, well, what is it that's transmigrating? There's nothing there to transmigrate. And they think that's such a powerful statement they're coming forward. Well, here's what's transmigrating. You've got 3 bodies. And if you're seeing that, that chart that I'm referring to now, you can see how Holy Mother taught about this. The transmigrating soul is a body-mind mechanism or a psychophysical being. So it's a collection of component parts. If you remember 2 weekends ago, we were talking about the Puryastika body that Krishna teaches about the eightfold body. That was a very old version of this composite that goes from place to place. And so immediately you'd have to say, so that the understanding is established first, is that the soul does not move. It doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't get reborn. So when you ask what's being reborn, obviously something is. It's just that most people think that in higher philosophy that what's being born has no substance to it. Well, I would say it has substance, but it doesn't have essence to it necessarily. It's changing, so it's impermanent, it's transitory, it's ephemeral, it's all those words, it's unreal. But nonetheless, from the standpoint of the being who's doing the transmigrating, it seems very real to them. And the seers aren't standing back and telling you, oh, you're nothing. Your body, your mind is nothing. They're telling you to use these mechanisms for a higher realization, like using the body as a temple, for instance, when it's easy to denigrate the body, but it's performing all these wonderful functions for you. So it'd be better to deify it. That's a good word in Tantra, is to deify. So this chart here is going to show us basically what is it that's transmigrating the body-mind mechanism. It has three bodies. It has this body first, the immanent body in an immanent world. It has a transcendent body in a transcendent world it goes to, and it has a absolute world and a transcendent body. We usually call that gross, subtle, and causal in Vedanta. Under the gross, you can see there what is it that's coming and going. 5 elements of earth, water, fire, air, and ether. The body composed of marrow, bones, fat, flesh, blood, skin, and nails. The 5 organs of action: speaking, handling, locomotion, excreting, and procreating. Those have to do all with the gross body in the immanent world. Immanent world means this world right here, the physical world, the Burloka. Now, the subtle body and the causal body are part of a transcendent world as far as relative to the immanent world. And you can see what the subtle body consists of: intellect, ego, thought, and mind. More specifically, that's really what's doing the transmigrating, because memories are collecting in the mind. Great thoughts and unworthy thoughts are collecting in the mind as samskaras. We looked at that last week. The ego mechanism is transmigrating from place to place. It has memories of what it did. Otherwise, it wouldn't be awakening to them. You see, as we move on, so it'll become more and more evident that what the soul is raising itself out of is done by the means of remembering actions it did. Sometimes that's painful, like bad karmas. But other times, good karmas bring up insights about having done deeds in the past that were good deeds, see. So this is all lodged in what they call the manas buddhya hamkara. See, the chitta, that's the fourfold mind. They call that in Sanskrit antaha karana. Antaha karana. That's the fourfold mind. And there you see next to it the 5 subtle elements. Audibility was hearing on earth. Tangibility was feeling on earth in the body. Visibility was seeing on earth in the body. Flavor was tasting on earth in the body. Odor was smelling on earth in the body. So in your subtle body, you're still having these 5 elements and these 5 senses, right? They're just now at the level of the body, level of the mind, the antakarana. And those are having experiences, let's call it, of heaven right now. And so this is why in India, they became aware of the fact that they needed to get beyond the heaven aspiring senses. That's a direct quote out of the Svetashvatara Upanishad. They went beyond the heaven aspiring senses and they beheld the Atman. That was in the heart chakra. 5 senses of knowledge are still there in the subtle body: smelling, tasting, seeing, feeling, and hearing. As you do that in a dream. Remember, we're talking about coming out of waking and dreaming, right? Into a level of cognizance. And then the 5 modes of life force are found: inhalation, exhalation, circulatory, ascending, digestive, and distributive. So those are called the 5 pranas, or the 1 prana in 5 forms. to quote Swami Vivekananda. So you can see that the subtle body and the causal body all have, the subtle body has all of this in it. So that's going to make more sense and be more of a reason by which one can trace a residue from lifetime to lifetime, like Tibetan Buddhism has. Oh, why are they coming back with attraction to that particular thing? Even illumined souls have attraction to certain things that they experienced in a previous lifetime. So we'll hold up this mirror to the baby, and the baby says, "Ah, I recognize that was mine in another lifetime." So it's by experimentation in this way that you find out if a soul has memories. I remember a person about talking about their parents. They were Hindus. Parents put vegetables and meat in front of them, and so one of the children decided to eat it all, and other children didn't. Just thought the meat wasn't food, and just ate the vegetables. So that's the way they raised the children, according to their samskaras. And so that one stayed a Hindu vegetarian all his life and just ate vegetables and rice and lentils and so forth. So it's again proving a fact that we have these memories in our mind by which we've lived before, these samskaras. And if the people who are outside of us in the body already, when we come into the body from inside, because we come from inside to out, know about the art of spiritual training, then they'll produce this in front of us. They'll do these experiments, or they'll base your life on these truths that have been realized by the gurus, by the acharyas, by the sages and saints and seers, and by the example of the avatars. These will be more real and more important than anything else available in the body or on earth. As you can see why there are so many higher levels of knowledge coming yet to be encountered and taken possession of, mastered. Causal body is hard to say much about it. It's an undifferentiated state of consciousness. All the differentiations that were here in sets of fives and so forth are not there anymore. Intellect ceases to vibrate there. So even the buddhi has become transcendent. It's leaning towards transcendent in the Atman. The mind is existing, but it's in a very subtle state now with seeds in it, seeds that haven't manifested. The gunas are resting in equilibrium, which is important. The three gunas. The condition of deep sleep is there and as the ground of the of the causal body. So you could see how it would be awakened to naturally as the soul matured its inner facilities, its inner qualities. Another beautiful point about it is that it pre-exists the physical world. So out of this body will come your subtle body, and out of the combination of those two will come your gross body, from evolution out and then involution back in, Lord Copula says in Samkhya. Sancharaha prati sancharaha, he said, there's an evolution out of all the tattvas from the causal state to the subtle to the gross. And then there's an involution back inward, back to the source. The source we haven't talked about yet, Turiya, is the full absorption at the very top of the 7 levels of Jnana. There is a great goal. As we talk about this, we want to keep that in mind. And then and it's the cause of the subtle and gross bodies, the causal body. So it really makes us begin to think about, well, my body here on earth, what condition is it? Is it healthy? Is it unhealthy? Is it strong? Is it weak? Is it adequate or inadequate? Is it long-lived or is it short-lived? All these things are characteristics that happened that are held back in seeds in deep sleep. So this is why beings began to study their deep sleep state and the seeds therein, not only to find out the great the great science of spirituality, the original Adi Daiva Vidya, Adi, the original Daiva, divine wisdom of how all of this happens. Not only for that reason, but also to find out how they could live fuller lives while they were in the lower worlds or subject to people who needed to be awakened to their higher potential. Another good reason for that. So there are many quotes here by Holy Mother. You can look in the book Footfalls of the Indian Rishis to read her quotes about transmigrating, because she's got very good things to say about all of these things. But I wanted to go to this chart in accordance with this level of Jagrat to show you what it is that's transmigrating and what the seers all acclaim to be what's going from place to place. Go thou from place to place and help them out of darkness, as Vivekananda said. So you're going to have knowledge of these three bodies. You're going to have that in order to help others, like the Jivan Mukta has, like the Bodhisattva has. So you can't stand there and say, oh, those are unreal, don't go help them. See, or what is it that's transmigrating? Well, we know what it is that's transmigrating. Let's try and get it to stop. Or let's try and get it to stop transmigrating at a lower level so it doesn't have to suffer. So there are plenty of more important questions to ask by viewing the action of the seers who come into the body. They're not saying, oh, this is unreal. You see, that's not their first. They already know that. They're saying, how can I help with this mechanism? Who can I help? How can I help? Where is it that I'm most needed? And that's much more important question to ask than some philosophical question that comes to mind. So look at her quotes there. So many of them are so beautiful about following the course of reincarnation. In fact, let's read Sri Ramakrishna's at the bottom of this chart. Following the Maya of knowledge, step by step, one attains the knowledge of Brahman. So here it is. Isn't this the Maya of knowledge dense down here? And then it becomes the knowledge of Mahamaya up here. So he's aware of this. Following the Maya of knowledge, step by step, one attains the knowledge of Brahman. This Maya of knowledge can be likened to the last few steps of a stairway. Next is the roof. Some, after reaching the roof, go up and down the stairs, which is to say that they keep the ego of knowledge for helping others. For tasting divine bliss, and for sporting with the devotees. So three very good reasons there why a soul comes to earth in the body, according to Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa Dev. So I think that's a kind of important step, that when it goes from Bindu Jagrat to Mahajagrat, we have to know that the soul started out with a very dimmed down, tiny little view of itself, began to become aware of its individuation, and was inflated with the thought of that. You can see how some of that's still persisting at 4, 5, and 6. Then finally reached a place where it is getting an inkling that there's something more to itself than just this one life alone. And people are having experiences that are inexplicable, that come from experiences in their past lifetimes, and they can't explain them. So they'll go to psychologists, or they'll go to different kinds of people with worldly knowledge, and to get various sorts of answers. Basically, it just shows that this is going on in the mind of collective humanity here on earth. Let's look at the fourth level, Jagrat Swapna. Now we take up the word for dreaming in Sanskrit. So Jagrat was the word for waking, and Swapna for dreaming, and Sushupti is the name for deep sleep. So you can see how we're coming up from a very darkened place of waking to a sort of a little bit of evolution, then to a wider view of the individual self. Finally, Jagrat Swapna means that, in a sense, you could say, I think maybe this life is kind of dreamlike, or it's not actually real, as this philosopher she'll start to tell you. Basically, I think I'd rather spend time in my dreams, or I'd rather spend time retiring from the world, and out of ignorance, of course, not out of any greater goal. So this is still at a kind of darksome level. So you could see the teachings there. At Jagrat Swapna level, the soul begins to seek sovereignty over nature. And it gets attached to objects that way and labors under delusion. Those are three landmarks of the Jagrat Swapna. This is basically, these are the dreams I'm having that are opposite but connected to my waking state. Because I can dream a lot of things in dreams and get them easily, but in the waking state, it's going to take a lot of effort to try and procure them for myself. And nature is rather like that. It takes a lot of work to look into nature and extract from nature what the soul desires from it. And then as it begins to concentrate on mining earth, on controlling the flow of water, of using air for various things, and ether and so forth, then it begins to get attached to the very things which it's trying to gain mastery over. So this is why I said earlier, Sri Ramakrishna said, best to study it from a distance, and then have that safety net for yourself, rather than get into it, think it's real, and try and own it for yourself. And so this is kind of a miracle how sometimes the mother will rescue the soul from that kind of thinking or that kind of predicament, so that there's a glimmer of light that comes through, called a higher level of thinking, that happens to some people who are at risk at falling into domination over nature. Even the devotees are that way. Like when they sing about their attachment to objects and wealth, like this song. Namajapane kyun chordiya ramanam Japane kyun chordiya rama Namajapane kyun chordiya Krodana chora Chutana chora Krodana chora, Jutana chora, Satavachane kyun chordiya Rama, Namajapane kyun chordiya Rama, Nam Japane kyun chordiya Rama. Namajapane kyun chordiya. As is Ram Navami was last week, so we're singing this beautiful Ram Bhajan, and wherein Kailas sings, you flatter the millionaire and forget to praise the Lord. Though the Lord is the owner of the entire universe, your mind dwells constantly on sense objects and mundane habits, tempted by that which has no eternal existence. Is it for the sake of these fleeting things that you have forsaken the precious gem of the Lord's name? So tell me, O mind, why have you given up uttering the holy name, when you should be renouncing instead your anger, deceit, and dishonesty? You have given up your integrity and sacrificed your love of truth instead. So if that happens to a soul at some point, you can see how a birth in a lower realm like that wouldn't be so hard to understand, why they had given up their pursuit of truth and fallen into such things as trying to get sovereignty over nature, as he calls them here, fleeting things. Why are you seeking those that are changing all the time and getting bound to them, bound to objects, attached to objects? And as a result, then you're losing your love of truth and God. Like, what does it avail a man to gain a kingdom but lose a soul? Has been said by Jesus at another time. So there are songs sung about beings who are operating at a higher level of awareness, but whose minds are still haunted by things that had happened to them over lifetimes. And so this is why awakening to, as Sri Krishna mentions in the Gita, awakening to the existence of previous lifetimes is very important for people to begin to at least entertain in this day and age in the West, as it explains so much which goes unexplained in people's actions and thoughts and what they teach their children. So another very powerful reason to continue on with this kind of pursuit of dharmic wisdom. So that's a little bit about Jagrat Swapna. Basically, if you try and get the things of nature and then you attach to them as if they're real, and that makes you attach to objects, then you end up laboring in delusion and you have this karmic repercussion coming back. We looked at that earlier on last week in that whole sinkhole chart where desires and samskaras were recurring to people who were forgetting the truth of existence and engaging in this kind of lower activity, lower realms of thought where darkness is prevalent. Another thing I wanted to flash back to, because we had it in a recent class series, was this. If you remember it, in a recent class series, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but it does explain how people get caught at the surface level of the powers of nature. There's basically there are the powers of nature, then there are occult powers of the mind, and then basically there are powers of the mind, and then there are powers of the yogic powers too. So the teachers often warn us away from the occult powers, but I have to say that at this level of lower thinking, you can see how they're laboring in delusion and how nature has taken over. So you could see here, if you remember from our teachings, about physical power and its limitations. Mastering the 5 elements for purposes of increasing personal wealth. Where I just sang that song, the Kalash saying, you flatter the millionaire, but you forget to praise Sri Ram. Also coveting the objects of nature for enhancement of sensual pleasure. So the senses and the objects, as is instanced here in the last level, are still haunting the soul. Fashioning devices and inventions in order to expand individual influence. You can see, I already said that started way back here in the individuation of the soul. It says, I'm an individual, I'm better than that individual, I'm going to compete with it, and I'm going to gain power over it. That's for, it tries to increase the realm of its influence. Like government officials and little tiny officers, they have power over these little tiny workings. Somebody wrote me last week and said about that. See, and then they just control these little tiny areas of life and stand as obstacles to people getting anything accomplished. So this is this individual influence that people are trying to expand for the sake of the ego and for the sake of nature and for the sake of objects and desires and wealth. The next one is attempting to integrate aspects of nature's power in order to elevate the personality. That's called, when it becomes at an occult level, it's called mahima, trying to make oneself great. Like I'm saying, oh, I have a country, I'm living next to two other countries on my border. I think I'll become the greatest country and I'll absorb them and dominate over them by creating war between us for whatever reason. And then I'll win the war and I'll be able to get their resources. This is all what's talked about, is trying to make oneself great in the face of others and maybe scare them or make them fear you, or in other ways, take what is not theirs. That's why in yoga, asteya is one of the earliest yamas, non-coveting of other people's goods. The Ishavasha Upanishad says that right out the front. Do not covet the goods of others. So in India, the Upanishadic era, the rishis knew that this was not a good course to pursue. In fact, if you pursued it, then you'd be recalling some scars of darkness that would influence you. So it's not just that you're coming up and out of darkness. It's that, like, you might run the risk of getting pulled back down into those same darkness of the mind. And as Kalas just sang for us, you see, we're getting all the reaches, the upper reaches of the Sushumna. Life at the upper reaches of the Sushumna, the name of a chart that I was just working on. Eternal life. So basically, what is not here at these lower four levels we're discussing right now are these things on the right-hand side. The thought comes forward: God does not exist. There is no soul. Worldly knowledge is best. Matter is all there is. I seek only my own good. I am better than others. Ignorance is bliss. The body's health is paramount. My race is superior to those of others. Only my religion is true. Objects can bring me happiness. Wealth is the goal of life. The ego personality is the real person. I don't have to stop and explain each one of those individually, I hope. In fact, I probably did in our last class series, where this was the main chart. So this is all about proper delineation of these three powers. So I wanted just to show you the top part of this chart so that we can understand deeper what we've studied in the past in the Dharma about how the soul is being led by ignorance and darkness in these lower four Ajnana Bhumikas. And so unfortunately, that's a newer chart, so it's not in Footfalls. But look back on this class and you can read about the occult powers, and you can also read about the powers of the yogi, and you can also read about the 6 great powers of God. Those are all up here, you see. But down here, we've got those physical powers and those occult powers. So I wanted to show that to you once more. Let's go on to the 5th level of Ajnana Bhumika. We're rising up and out of these tendrils of darkness more and more. Whereas 4 was called Jagrat Swapna, this is called just Swapna. And you can see the change in the soul. It gains, that is, the transmigrating soul. There's no change whatsoever in the Supreme Soul. The Supreme Soul is what's looking on. And in fact, the seers who gave rise to these levels of knowledge at different stages of time in India are that great one soul who's looking on. They've realized themselves to be in union with that, to be one with it. So this kind of witness consciousness begins to happen here in a small way by gaining objectivity. Before you were attached to the body ego mechanism, the ego had to have some experiences of suffering and also some experiences of how pleasure is limited. And both of those things are a kind of pain. Father of Yoga calls those pain-bearing obstacles. So when the soul begins to have those and tries to wiggle out of them, karmas, some scars from the past, and diseases of the body, and restlessness of the mind, basically are the three classifications, then it begins to withdraw a little bit. And so it gains some objectivity and it examines life's events in dream. So this can happen in daydream even, uh, in some sort of early form of meditation called rumination or contemplation. If that happened to me, there must be a reason, kind of thing. And why can't why am I subject to that? And this is where strength is beginning to uh, accumulate and weakness is beginning to go away. So we wanted to look at that in terms of weakness. This is another chart we used quite long ago, but to explain this gaining of objectivity and unveiling life's events in a dream, um, it it begins to awaken. Remember these things when it wakes up from dream. So dreams are beginning to suggest itself on the waking state, and that's a very important shift. So if you were to look at this chart, we'll just look down the left-hand side of it. As you can see on the top, if you want strength, you go to the right. But if you fall into the clutches of weakness, you go to the left. So souls at this point, like I said, are having the possibility of falling back into old ways of thinking, old habits, old attachments, and failing themselves and failing the goal of spirituality. This can even happen at the state of Sushupti and Jagrad and Jnana Bhumikas, where basically people see the truth, they select a teacher, they get a mantra, they study a scripture, and then they decide to go back to lazy, complacent life and give up the goal. And hopefully in another lifetime, they'll take it up again. Remember how we saw that in Sri Krishna's chart last week in the Gita, how souls will try and pick up the thread of the yoga. He's not saying there that maybe all beings do. It's also very possible that they're losing the thread of their yoga and falling back into worldliness. This is why getting a good set of parents is very important, dharmic parents, that they have been doing that for so many generations and generations in India, where these teachings are given to them. That's why we have such a host of them to look at now. So we were just talking then about how your objectivity is being gained, and you're beginning to examine lives in a dream. Life, maybe thinking that, I've lived before, or maybe the dream state becomes more favorable to you, so you spend more time sleeping. There's all sorts of risks here too, based on weakness. So you can see how this column on the left-hand side runs it down real quick. Basically, there's a severed connection between the mind and energy. So you don't have the energy to follow through. Very important for people to know that the prana needs to come under their control and remain with them. And so that you can master that, the fourth limb of yoga. That's pranayama. So Father of Yoga is giving you practice how to do that. Conscious breathing every day, conscious thoughts, mindfulness, they call it, and so forth. Don't let the connection between the mind and energy be severed. Then next is life force moves unevenly through the nerves and nadis when that happens. And so the body can't control its actions. The mind can't control the body. Then lethargy of the body, dullness of the senses happens. This is very reminiscent of these lower stages of Ajnana Bhumika. And also, if people die in this condition, is also a reason why they're born without knowledge. They're going to need a lot of help, Vivekananda said, if they're not born with this innate knowledge of the upper levels. And he's just as well admitting that there are a lot of souls who are born devoid of remembrance of these higher levels of wisdom, and that's why they're taking an inferior birth. But he's not saying they're cast to hell. He's saying they're going to need more help from us. A beautiful quote that he says about that. So after the body becomes listless and the senses become dull, then loss of discrimination around proper food happens. You see that happening a lot nowadays, is they're just eating very unhealthy food and they're eating much too much of it. And so the idea of moderation goes out the door and health suffers as a result. And no real nourishment is given to the body that can help the prana remain contact with the mind. See, we've done several charts and several retreats and class series on this very phenomena to try and help people correct their relationship with food and energy. So unfortunately, this is a staircase going the other direction than what we just talked about in the previous chart. It's going deeper down into this darkness. When this connection between energy and food is lost, then the breakdown of the immune systems happen. So this is where illness sets in. So disease and illness is one of the real problems of a person who loses their health. Natural immune systems suffer. And these are the reasons why. A lot of people can get diseases and not know the reasons why and go to so-called specialists. But this is the main reason why the yogi doesn't have to do this lifetime to lifetime, is that they have these connections with the prana. The nadis are open from the lowest to the highest, from the root chakra to the sushumna, up the sushumna to the sahasrara. These are open, and so they're not suffering illness, and they're not suffering attachment to objects like food and other things that people are suffering when they lose these important connections. So the immune system suffer. That's one of the signs. The balance of the in-breath, suspended breath, and out-breath gets compromised. That's why if they see you in such a state, then some of these teachers will say, well, let's have you breathe. And they're hoping that will open up the mind's natural abilities. But basically, it can also just go so far because you have to know how to connect the energy back to the mind, prana, back to psychic prana, we call it. Not just prana back to a healthy body, but prana back to psychic prana, because that's what's going to light up your thoughts or reveal to you that there is such a thing as higher thoughts that you can live at. You can master and live at that higher level. That's called a Jnana Bhumika. Not a Jnana Bhumika, but a Jnana Bhumika. So that's one of the ways they'll catch a falling soul. See, like they see him start falling down the ladder, say, grab him by the collar, pull him back up, breathe. You see, so that's sometimes a last ditch effort for these souls. If they can just breathe and get their energy back, they can turn their life around. And then comes the thinking process becomes easily confused when you aren't breathing. You can see confusion and confused acts going on in people. And they're just not getting this natural, open recourse and access to one of the most purifying elements in all the worlds called prana. The prana has deserted them. Then violent acts are perpetrated due to erratic prana. Mind gets imbalanced, loses conscience and memory. Life is beset with doubt, fear, guilt, and remorse. Remember, all of this is happening where? In the waking, dreaming, and deep sleep state. You're falling back into a very minuscule little type of cycle. And they say, millions of souls are on the larger version of that cycle called the Kala Chakra or samsara, the wheel of samsara. So this is describing what the seers have explained to us in different ways. You could, take a hologram right here and just have this cycle dip down into this 7 levels and see how souls are just coming into it, coming back out of it, being reborn again into it, and partaking of picking up the thread of their last lifetime, which wasn't a very strong thread. If it was a strong thread at all, it was a strong thread leading downwards. And this is where you see people having problems with doubt, fear, and remorse, guilt, and so forth. Quite often, conventional religion doesn't help that. Psychology doesn't help that. They're trying, but there's much better and more direct ways of recovering a soul from that kind of darkness. Breathing, again, being one of the first that they'll go to. Then the body and the brain become subject to multiple diseases, and death and rebirth and ignorance take place. It's probably that's the path of falling into weakness. And now we know why Vivekananda said, the only true sin is weakness. So he chose that word and that tendency of people and replaced the sin of so-called damnation and hell and brimstone and fire and all that. Just put that aside, said, that's just a loka you can climb out of, but this weakness is the greatest actual sin, because your soul is never a sinner. It's always perfect and divine. But you're on your way to it. If you're climbing up and out of, using the stairway up and out of darkness to higher thoughts, then you're going to want to have something very strong to remedy such a condition of such as weakness. So it's really, really, we're very well put. And there's this opposite side to it called strength, which moves upwards and inwards. The soul intuits the need to purify the physical nadis. You might say that's beginning to happen, right? There's some objectivity. I need to purify. I need to get my body healthy again. I need to breathe again. I need to keep my thoughts vibrating at a higher level. And they began conscious breathing exercises and sattvic food that will animate the prana. You see, prana is waiting to be animated, as it were. External senses become pure and connect to the inner senses. Shall we go back to this chart again and show how your subtle body has inner senses, right? So you've lost connection, evidently, if you're in this condition. So then breathing and good food and so forth will connect you back to your inner senses. You see how it works here with remembrance of past lifetimes. Is that why is it that you are beginning to become objective? And why is it that you're beginning to examine lives as if in a dream? It's because in the past you had connection of your prana with your mind. And that was a good lifetime you lived. So now it's beginning to dawn on you that you're missing something. You see, something very essential is being taken from you. So say there are many robbers on the road of life, as Vivekananda used to sing in one of his beautiful songs. And so you have to make sure that these don't steal away from you this precious mind, prana, thought of a spiritual kind. They don't rob you of that. And so this is, you might as well, as we go through this in the remaining minutes, we might as well be showing you how these 7 lower states are actually turning into higher states. It's another way of saying it. So the psychic prana flows to make thoughts buoyant after the external senses have become pure and connected to the inner senses. So this is, psychic prana is a very almost unknown thing here in this world, in the West, in this world, in this time. The psychic prana is the power that animates your thoughts. That's a great power, but it has to have, it's a kind of power or force or prana that's not going to be there if you don't breathe physically. You see, you're not going to waken up to the higher prana until the lower prana is set and satisfied. The practitioner then discovers the secret of the scriptures. A guru appears in life first, and then a practitioner discovers the secret of the scriptures. And then the intellect perceives its connection to Mother Wisdom. What does it remind you of right now? Does it remind you of Queen Chudala's Walking of the Skies chart that we had two weekends ago, 2 Sundays ago? Remember how she walked the skies? This is what it's reminding me of as I read it. She's getting into higher meditations. Yes, the intellect perceives its connection to Mother Wisdom. That's Shakti power, Kundalini power. And then that power inundates the body-mind mechanism. Selfless works and individual sadhana ripen. Selfless works and individual sadhana. Meditation matures to reveal the truth of unity. And the soul has open darshana with higher powers. And it's Ishtam. That's his chosen ideal. Like Ras, Sri Ramakrishna, and Holy Mother. You have open darshan, then. It's a matter of natural course. Neutralization, destruction of primal karmas ensues. So this is also something that, as I was mentioning, these souls that are in possession of these higher states of thinking still have some tendrils maybe connected to old karmas. But now you can see them and destroy them as you rise up to openness to these higher levels of thinking. Higher levels of yoga, higher chakras. And that higher means deeper, of course. Then the gunas get mastered and transcended. Always one of the penultimate achievements in Vedanta and yoga are the transcendence of the gunas. And finally, the mind gains full illumination, merges into Brahman. And that would, of course, be a tantamount to Turiyatita. It transcends even the Gitas, the gunas, I'm sorry. So we can see here Swami Vivekananda's statement, the pleasure of the self is what the world calls religion. But the more our bliss is within, the more spiritual we are. Let us not depend on the world for pleasure. He always puts it very succinctly and straight to the point. So let's not have any weak links, it's kind of what he's saying here, in the mind. All the links need to be strong and connected eternally in order to keep this weakness from happening so that rebirth in the lower states could happen to a soul. Like I said, they're thinking, if these beings are born in a materialistic country and they're not getting the teachings, how quickly can we fish them out of that problem? So let's send a great soul there. Let's give them the Dharma teachings and see what happens. See, our own founder, Lex Dixon, said, Vedanta in America and the West basically is a kind of experiment right now. We're kind of guinea pigs, as it were, to see how this ancient Dharma, with its connection to the absolute truth, and its many, many hundreds and thousands of great souls that have lived and supported it, how will that affect a whole culture that's climbing out of darkness, are still involved in materialism, still involved in objects, desires, still with attachments, still with the warring against each other in countries, still with their ego fights between individuals. How is that truth? How quickly can that truth dawn on their minds and shore them up and extract them up and out of the lower bhumikas, to put it in older language. We've basically almost run out of time, but we did make it through 2 more levels of Ajnana Bhumika. So it's getting good now because we've seen what waking in darkness and dreaming in darkness, if you want to put it very succinctly, is all about. So next week and Sunday, we'll look at Swapna, Jagrat, and Sushupti. It seems like Swapna Jagrat is now turning dreaming state to be more prevalent than the waking state. That is, you're bringing, and one of the great teachings here is that more light is beginning to come to your dreaming state, and you're bringing more of your own consciousness out to bear upon your waking and dreaming state. That seems to be what happens. In fact, that's what happens at 6. You see there, it renders the waking state lucid. So people used to ask me about that. How do I have lucid dreaming? I said, by having lucid waking. So basically, your acts and your thoughts in the waking state will affect your dreaming state positively. And when the dreaming state becomes lucid, then you can see through the dreams and you can see the seeds in the deep sleep state called the causal body, right? We looked at that. Remember, these are all in accordance with gross body, subtle body, causal body, this complex that's transmigrating billions of times over in cycles that are endless and beginningless, like and lower dark, some kind of levers of these cycles that you do not want to be caught in, like always being born at a higher chakra, always passing away at a higher chakra. So in India, the Mahabharata and teachings like that say, these beings want to, at the time of their passing, you want to read them the scriptures. You want to, the Upanishad says, recall to them their past good deeds because the mind is losing its natural energy, prana, at that time in many cases. And so they might begin to forget their wisdom and not be able to take it with them past the Kirtan nations and back again. So that's where rebirth in the lower 3 worlds will take care. That's what's transmigrating into the location of the lower 3 worlds. All wisdom and knowledge that we have to be very aware of as we practice to refine our awareness to be able to live and exist and share teachings of the upper 7 Jnana Bhumikas with other beings. Laja pata vritti nicham sharadam jnana daite papejo nadara shaksha pranamami mahor mahor Jnanam sharadam devim Ramakrishnam jagadgurum Pado padme toye shritva pranamami mahor mahor pranamami mahor mahor. O Ramakrishna, teacher of all, O Sharada, goddess divine, in bosom holding those lotus feet, salutations to both ever be of mine. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.